So, Lewis, we're going to talk about fear, and it's fairly well known by psychologists that fear is at the heart of everyone, particularly fear of death. It's what they call our core neurosis. It's the thing that drives many of the things. And of course, Spinoza talks about the will to persist in existence and this drive within us that I think was called the conatus in the past. Uh, I'd be interested in your thoughts on fear and its central role in what we are and how we deal with it.
Fear. What is fear? If we take a look at Spinoza's definition in his Ethics, let's go there first and get a definition of fear. Uh, if those who have the Ethics, Spinoza's Ethics, it's on page 176.
Yeah, this is
Different,
the Elwes edition, isn't it? The Dover Elwes edition.
and it's the yeah, it's the Elwes translation and
Yeah,
the Dover edition.
yeah, Dover
Edition.
edition. Yeah,
And this is on page 176, number 13. Fear is an inconstant pain arising from the idea of something past or future, whereof we, to a certain extent, doubt the issue.
yeah,
Again, let's take a look at that. Fear is an inconstant pain. So fear is always connected with pain,
yeah,
but it's inconstant. It's not permanent. Fear. So with fear, there's always hope. But we're going to focus on fear. But there's always hope. That's why it's inconstant. It's not a permanent pain. There also it involves doubt. Fear is an constant pain arising from the idea of something, say, in the future. Let's talk about the future, where we, to a certain extent, doubt the issue. Now, if we can have an example, it's always good to have an example. One of my other students, I won't mention her name, um, she's been married, say, for, say, 30 years. And for the holidays, she visits her husband's mother. This woman lives in, well, it doesn't matter where she lives, but they have to travel. They have to go to another state, another country to visit her. And this woman, the mother-in-law, uh, has this attitude of total control. And my student, let's call her Carol. Carol hates visiting her mother-in-law. Why? Because Carol is in immense fear. She has this pain that, what's the pain? Is that she feels she can never do anything right. She can never please her mother-in-law. She has this ongoing fear. She's always, the holidays come and she is in fear because she knows she's going to visit the mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law does not like Carol. She tells her, well, that's what Carol believes, that her mother-in-law does not like her. She tells her what to do. She tells her how to cook. She doesn't seem to do anything right, even when she arranges the table for the Christmas get-together, the feast, the party. When she even washes dishes, it's not good enough. And also, when the mother-in-law visits her home, she always finds something wrong. Now, in this experience, of course, there's doubt about whether Carol is going to uh, cause a reaction towards whether or not she's going to have that she's going to cause the mother-in-law to react. Most people live in fear. I've lived in fear most of my life. Interesting about fear. Fear takes expresses itself in different ways. My fear was I always wanted the approval of others. And I had fear about being disapproved of. It could be even strangers want their approval, and therefore I had a constant smile to cause others to smile back at me. Fear, and where does fear come from? Again, fear is pain.
It's a
Oh,
diminishing of power, isn't it? That's
yes, it is. Well, yes, but it is. Yeah, pain. You're right, Martin. Pain is a diminished feeling of a lack of something.
yes,
And just like when we have a sliver on our hand from grabbing a piece of wood, and suddenly we have this pain. Pain is an indication that something is, say, not right for the body. The body's been invaded by this thing. It doesn't belong there. So the body has its own mechanism to try to get rid of this pain. Likewise, the psychic has this mechanism to want to get away from pain. It depends on the environment you grew up in. If you grew up in an environment where you are diminished, meaning that you are thought you are discarded, or uh, you felt you felt dismissed, or you were not paid attention to. I grew up in an environment where there were, say, 10 siblings, and every child was wanting attention, and there was not enough attention from the parents to please everyone. So everybody was fighting for attention. Fear is manifested in us by nature. I think the forces of nature, you've mentioned the word conatus. The conatus is a force in nature. It's a universal force. Science is recognized as a necessary force. Physics points out the idea of the conatus, that everything will remain as it is. I call it conatus. But there is a universal force that everything will remain as it is. So fear in us is stimulated very early in life, because the minute a child is born, it starts crying. It desires nourishment. It desires comfort. If that comfort doesn't come at a certain time, to quench the desire for hunger of a child, infant, fear is immediately in there. Fear manifests very early in life. Fear of not getting what we want. And sometimes the mother may not be available to nourish the child, so the child is constantly crying. As we grow older, the child now begins to recognize the need for its own, to satisfy a need for approval. There's an inner need in every individual to be recognized and to be approved of. But if that is not satisfied, that can never be satisfied. If an individual does not develop true self-approval, that's another subject of what approval is. But since we don't have self-approval, we must seek it outside of ourselves. We must demand it from others. And so this was in me and all my siblings, that we had this need of approval. So I grew up with a lack of approval, self-approval, and I'm always looking at outside of us. Likewise, Carol did not have her own self-approval. Because where does self-approval come from? Self-approval comes to a state of mind that I know, that I understand, and what I do, I understand what I'm doing. I don't need anybody else to tell me that I know how to, say, cook a meatloaf. I know the recipe, I've done it many times, and I do it well. And I get affirmation from others. But I don't need that affirmation because I know how to make meatloaf. That simple act is self-approval. But if an individual lacks this natural understanding that I know, if, then doubt is present. If there is doubt in the mind, there is always fear. Where there's fear, there's always hope. And where there's hope, there's always fear. There's nothing solid in the individual mind. We're not solid in our thinking. So here Carol goes to this home and she's in this state of fear. And she's nervous about what she does, and the mother-in-law picks up this nervousness.
Yeah, I mean, I note in Spinoza that he says if we become certain about some thing that we fear, then we fall into despair. So, if we fear, I don't know, that someone is going to disapprove of us, but actually we know they're going to disapprove, then we become despairing. And, I read something very interesting yesterday, actually, about people in jail who fall into despair because they know that on a day-by-day basis that nothing's going to change for quite a while. So they know that they're stuck in there for 5, 10, 15 years or whatever. And despair can set in because they know that that's the case. There is no hope in that case. There's just pure despair. But the fear of death, which is something all of us have to some extent, or most people, is a strange one, because oddly enough we know that this is going to happen. So in a sense there's no doubt about the outcome. So maybe in truth that is not fear. Maybe that is just purely the force of life driving us on by this feeling of having to exist, of needing to continue our existence on a day-by-day basis. Because by Spinoza's definition, that is not fear. Because fear has hope involved, as you say. There's no hope involved in the fact that 150 years from now we're still going to be living. We know that that's not the case. So I think the fear of death thing is actually a different thing.
Yes, it is. It's interesting if you, as a teenager, or a young adult, 20, 21, 22, 24, there's a feeling of power,
Yeah.
of unlimited power, extreme exaggeration of one's power, abilities, extreme exaggeration. There's no contemplation of death. A teenager, a young person, does not think of death. Death comes about when we become at an age, maybe in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s. That becomes a reality, fear of death. Because an individual who has fear of death has a good reason to feel fear. They don't know what the heck is going to go, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
What's going to go after death? What is there? And if an individual, of course, there are atheists who believe, well, nothing's going to happen. You're going to go back to the earth where you belong. You're part of the stuff that makes up planet Earth. But these individuals are in great denial of the reality of death. Nobody wants to die, truthfully.
Yeah.
Even individuals in their dying bed begin to apologize about all the wrongs to their children. For the first time in their life, a father may talk to their sons, tell them, "I'm sorry that I never paid attention to you. I'm sorry that I was so mean or cruel to you, that I hurt you." Why do they do that? Because maybe they have this feeling, because interesting thing, as a man gets older, something happens to a man. no longer is he so aggressive. When he was 40, very strong, aggressive, dominant male. When he's in his 80s, he can be very childish, childlike. Why? Because male's hormones are no longer functioning.
Yeah.
And what is left is fear. The reality that he has not really taken care of himself physically, mentally, and spiritually. Martin, this work that we're learning, that we're discovering, will eliminate fear. Not totally, but as you begin to understand how fear operates. Carol, my student, no longer fears her mother-in-law. Why? She goes to her, and now Carol, is now in herself. This work allows an individual to learn how to come to their own sense of self, called true self-approval, through their true intelligence. What is this intelligence? It begins to understand these emotions, such as fear and hope, and understand why they're needed. Because if we have an absence of clarity, we're going to have fear.
Yeah. No, I should clarify that for myself, I don't particularly have fear of death. Um, and if there is any fear there, I don't mind having the fear. It's like I'm not frightened of the fear. Um, so that's me putting my position straight. But fear does drive. Forgetting about the fear of death thing for a minute, fear does drive people for a large part of their lives. It certainly did for me. My fear, I guess, was largely around. Well, I guess it was similar to yours, but in a different shade. But the fear of not being accepted, and I think that's probably fairly universal. And again, I don't particularly suffer from that anymore, much to my wife's annoyance. But
Well, why not? How did that happen, Martin? That
well,
you,
well, it happens through understanding the whole thing. That's how it happens. And in many modern spiritual practices, there's very, very little emphasis put on the notion of understanding. It was one of the things that frustrated me with the Gurdjieff work, that there was very little emphasis put on the notion of understanding how we work. And when you do start to understand it, and you only understand it by seeing it, when you do start to understand it, then, as if by magic, the emotions start to decline in their intensity. They lose their grip over you in some kind of way, and you gain some freedom from them.
exactly, Martin. And this is what you've learned over these last 3 years since you've been working with me. And something I've learned, um, the interesting thing is that one day I felt different. And I must have been doing this work for about 20 years. And obviously, you've experienced this in 3 years, much less than much sooner than I did. But one day I realized something was missing, and I couldn't understand what it was. But then it hit me: my old friend fear had left me, literally left me. And what replaced fear was acknowledgement of my desires, not just one desire, all desires. I no longer was afraid to express myself. I was no longer, and this being able to lead a group and to be able to say, communicate these ideas to others, I could not, fear was overwhelming, so I could not clearly communicate. But as I began to express the freedom that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to look stupid, it's okay to fail, because I learned from failure.
Yeah.
I learned from mistakes. But yet we are learned early in life to be afraid of those things, to hide the truth.
Yeah. Well, when we're young, there's a price to be paid, isn't there? So I suppose we get conditioned that way. I mean, I think we probably wanted to keep this down to about 20 minutes, didn't we, or thereabouts? We're sort of there now. I mean, if you're happy to wind it up, or if you got, I mean, if you got any more to say, we can say a bit more. But
It's amazing how the time goes by.
yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
but when you have something specific like this is so important because, like you say, it's universal fear.
yes,
And a very important, Martin, is that you want to begin to learn how to taste it and not run from it
yes,
and understand it because when in the understanding, we break its hold.
yeah.
All right, I will end with that.
Okay, well, very interesting, Lewis. I'm sure people will find this quite engaging, and we'll do it again soon.
Great,
Okay, thank you.
great.